Hi guys, my name is Matti Sulanto, and in this video I'm gonna take a look at the Sirui 50mm F1.8 Anamorphic camera lens. This whole video is shot on the Sirui 50mm F1.8 Anamorphic lens, except for those parts where you can see the lens itself, of course. And that's why I have this true cinematic wide aspect ratio. I used the Lumix GH5S and the G9 camera bodies. I'd like to thank Focus Nordic for loaning me this lens. But I'm not getting paid to make this video. I make this video and all my videos just to share my experiences with you guys. And this lens just sounded so interesting that I simply had to try it when I had the chance. Anamorphic lenses have been around for a while. The first anamorphic lenses were created during the First World War to have wider viewers for military tanks, and the very first anamorphic movie camera was created already in the 1920s. But anamorphic lenses didn't become popular in the movie industry until 1950s in Hollywood. And these days almost every big budget movie at least is being shot with anamorphic lenses. Anamorphic lenses squeeze wide horizontal view into a normal film frame or normal sensor if we are shooting on digital camera. And that makes it possible to retain the full resolution or the full detail of the normal sized frame when creating a wide cinematic aspect ratio like this one. The other way to create such a wide, narrow aspect ratio is of course by adding black bars on top and bottom of the frame, but that's going to crop the vertical resolution and that's not ideal. The straight out of camera footage looks like this, and then when it's de-squeezed in post it looks like this. In this video, the vertical resolution is 2160 pixels and the horizontal resolution is 5107 pixels. So this is essentially 5K video that you're looking at right now. Also typical for anamorphic lenses is very pronounced horizontal flare whenever a strong light hits the front element, and also the autofocus highlights get more like oval shape. So anamorphic lenses have been around for a long time, but typically they've been expensive specialist equipment for movie producers or movie makers. But this new Sirui lens is an exception because it's quite affordable anamorphic lens with its 700 dollars price tag. Of course, there are some anamorphic attachments for regular camera lenses and of course phone cameras too, but this Sirui is a real dedicated anamorphic lens, and that makes it unique, especially at this price point. This lens is of course designed for video and movie making, but it's also suitable for photography. On a film camera, an anamorphic lens would be a bit problematic, because you would need an anamorphic enlarger lens in order to print your images, or if you had slides, you would need an anamorphic projector lens in order to view your images. But with digital, it's quite easy. You just import your photos to your favorite image editing software like Photoshop or something else, and multiply the horizontal pixel count by 1.33 and you're done. And talking about photos, before I talk more about the lens itself, let's take a look at some photographs that I shot on this lens. Sirui 50mm is available for Micro Four Thirds, Fuji X and Sony E mounts. And it covers APS-C sensor size. When you look at the lens, you'll notice straight away that it's not an ordinary camera lens because of the square front element, which is typical for anamorphic lenses. This is a full manual lens, manual focus and no contacts or no data transfer between the lens and the camera whatsoever. And because of that, there is no EXIF data, so you can't see afterwards which focal length you used or which aperture, etc. No EXIF whatsoever regarding the lens. The focal length is 50mm and the horizontal angle of view is the same as on any 50mm lens, but the horizontal angle of view is the same as on a 37mm lens. And when you shoot on this lens, on most cameras the viewfinder image is kind of squeezed and it looks distorted or stretched, like vertically stretched. But on some cameras, like for example the Lumix GH5 and GH5S, you can de-squeeze the image in camera, so it's a little bit easier to shoot when you see how the footage is going to look. But even on some other cameras like the G9 for example, where the viewfinder image is not corrected, it's not that bad after you get used to it, and you get used to it very soon. Of course, after you've shot your photos or your video footage, you have to de-squeeze the footage or the photos in post. The video footage you can de-squeeze in any of the editors, video editors, and the photographs you can stretch in Photoshop or some other image editing application. The straight out of camera photos from a Lumix camera or Micro Four Thirds camera look like this, but after you stretch them to get the right proportions, they look like this, and the final aspect ratio is about 16:9. But of course, if you mount this lens on an APS-C camera, you get different aspect ratio because the APS-C frame is wider to begin with. The build quality of this lens is really excellent. The outer case or all parts are aluminum and the lenses are glass, of course. The manual focus ring is really smooth and a pleasure to use. And the aperture ring also is very smooth and it's de-clicked because this is designed for video. This lens weighs in at about 560 grams and the filter thread is 67mm. The lens feels quite heavy for its size, quite like dense, but still the handling is very balanced and it feels very comfortable, for example on the Lumix G9 or on the GH5S, for example. The optical construction is 11 elements in 8 groups, and there are 10 aperture blades inside of the lens to create those round or rather oval sized nice smooth bokeh balls. The minimum focusing distance is 85 centimeters, which is kinda long for a 50mm lens, and you can't do any kind of real close-ups on this lens. And I don't know, is it because of the anamorphic design that the minimum focusing distance is that long. Usually you would expect something like 50 centimeters or 40 centimeters at least on a 50mm lens. And there's no image stabilizer, of course, because this is a full manual lens. No electronics inside of the lens whatsoever. The optical performance of the Sirui 50mm F1.8 Anamorphic is really quite good. The lens is sharp and contrasty. It also handles backlight pretty well, but you will get that pronounced horizontal flare whether you like it or not. It's kind of part of the package when you get an anamorphic lens. To me, the horizontal flare looks quite attractive in video. But in photos, it's quite the opposite. I don't think it looks very nice. And I think it's because in In the video footage, the flare tends to move, or maybe it comes and goes, but in a photograph it's there all the time. So it's got a whole different nature in a photograph, and I think that's why it doesn't look so good in a photo. I did not notice any severe vignetting or distortions when I was using this lens. I also saw no signs of chromatic aberrations, but I saw some so-called bokeh fringing, which was relatively easy to remove, or most of it was relatively easy to remove in Lightroom when I was editing my photographs, and in the video footage I didn't notice it would be distracting or anything. Like I already said, the manual focus ring is really smooth and a pleasure to use, but somehow in some situations I had a hard time nailing the focus. Part of it is, of course, that at wide open aperture the depth of field is really shallow. But also there was something else, because I don't know, maybe it's the squeezed or stretched viewfinder image or something, but I was sure I nailed the focus, but later when I was looking at the photos or the video footage, it was not quite there, the focus. And I usually have no problem with manual focus lenses. I can't quite put my finger on it, but for some reason I had some difficulties in some situations when I tried to focus this lens. And maybe it's just me, maybe no one else has this problem, but I thought it's worth mentioning anyway. And besides, this problem goes away when you stop down just a little bit to get a bit more depth of field. But all in all, I would say the Sirui 50mm F1.8 Anamorphic lens is a really fun lens to use. And it's suitable for both photography and video. It's sharp, it's relatively affordable, and it's well built. I hope in the future Sirui will make a little bit wider anamorphic lens too, similar to this one, but maybe at around 25mm focal length, because that would be much more practical on a micro four thirds camera. And if you had a 25 and a 50, you could do a lot of things with those two lenses and maybe shoot a movie or something. I'd like to hear if you have ever used any kind of anamorphic lens, and if you have, and what kind of experiences you had, please leave me a comment down below. And as always, I hope you enjoyed watching this review, and thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.